Imagine this. You're lying in bed, staring at the ceiling, wondering if Karen from work actually laughed at your joke, or if she just sneezed mid-smile. Suddenly, the question slithers into your brain like a particularly judgmental snake. Do my friends actually like me? Or do they secretly hate me? Welcome, weary traveler of the subconscious, to tonight's journey where insomnia, philosophy, and a sprinkle of existential comedy intertwine. I'm here to soothe you with the dulcet tones of ancient wisdom, while also casually reminding you that Socrates, the man often called the father of Western philosophy, was executed for being a little too good at asking annoying questions. But don't worry. Unlike Socrates, you won't be sentenced to drink hemlock tonight. Unless, of course, your bedtime tea tastes suspiciously bitter. In that case, maybe rethink your social circle. We'll float together through the gentle waves of Socrates' thought. What friendship really means. Why questioning everything might actually be the key to peace, and whether your friends roll their eyes when you leave the group chat. Along the way, I'll keep you entertained with bad jokes and soothing commentary. Like a philosopher who also moonlights as a stand-up comedian at a very, very quiet comedy club. So, snuggle in, release the tension in your forehead, and let's drift into the paradoxical dream world of Socrates. By the end, you may just fall asleep, enlightened, or at least too drowsy to worry about whether your friends truly like you. Picture Athens at night. Not the noisy Athens of the day, full of merchants shouting about olives, goats bleating as they wander where they really shouldn't, and philosophers arguing over who stole, whose sandal. No. This is Athens. After the sun has gone down, the air has softened, the dust of the streets has settled into silence, and the stars above hang like little silver questions, waiting for someone bold enough to answer them. The city sleeps lightly. There are guards at the gates, of course, but mostly there is quiet. The oil lamps glow like scattered fireflies. If you walk through the narrow alleys, you catch whispers of laughter behind shutters, or the muffled snores of people who ate too much lentil stew for dinner. And into this peaceful picture, imagine a man short, round-bellied, barefoot. His beard is scruffy, his cloak a little too thin for the cool night air. This is Socrates, your bedtime guide for tonight. Now, if you were expecting a suave philosopher with a golden toga and teeth that sparkle in the moonlight, you may be disappointed. Socrates was not known for his beauty. In fact, his fellow Athenians described him as looking something like a satyr, bulging eyes, flattened nose, lips that were more functional than aesthetic. But this was part of his charm. You see, when you're that unattractive, people automatically assume you must be interesting, and Socrates leaned into this assumption with the confidence of a man who knew that charm wasn't in the jawline, but in the questions. So here he is, padding through the Athenian streets, looking very much like he belongs both everywhere and nowhere. You can almost hear his bare feet slapping gently against the stone, the sound of a man too distracted by thought to bother with shoes. He pauses to look at the stars. He probably wonders something like, "What is justice in the heavens?" Or maybe he's just thinking, "Those look nice." With Socrates, you could never be sure. He wasn't a writer. He never penned a single book. Everything we know about him comes from his students and his critics, like Plato, who admired him, and Aristophanes, who made fun of him in plays. Imagine if the only record of your life was what your friends and your frenemies posted about you online. That's Socrates' entire legacy. Yet somehow, this scruffy, shoeless man walking through the cool air of Athens has shaped how we all think. Even thousands of years later, let's walk with him for a bit. It's quiet. You're drowsy. And he's in a talkative mood. That was his specialty, catching people off guard with questions. Maybe tonight he's just come from the agora, the bustling marketplace where he liked to pester merchants and generals alike. Maybe he asked the fishmonger, "What is courage?" right as the man was trying to scale a particularly stubborn trout. Maybe he cornered a soldier and said, "What is honor?" just as the poor fellow was polishing his helmet and clearly wanted to be anywhere else. Socrates was not exactly the life of the party, but he was the spark that made people notice their own assumptions. As you walk beside him, notice the rhythm of his conversation. He doesn't lecture, he doesn't scold. He asks a question, then waits. Sometimes he waits so long, you wonder if he's forgotten the question. He tilts his head, blinks those owl-like eyes, and lets the silence grow heavy until you feel compelled to fill it. That was his trick. He would ask, "What is virtue?" And the other person, desperate to look clever, would rush in with an answer. Then he would gently, sometimes mischievously, poke holes in it, until they realized they didn't know at all what they thought they knew. The Athenians both loved and hated this. They admired him because he made them think. They hated him because, well, nobody likes realizing they don't know as much as they thought. And yet here he is tonight, walking softly through Athens, whispering to you as if you are his newest companion. He won't lecture you into sleep. Instead, he'll coax you with questions, weaving them into the gentle hum of the night air. He might ask, "What is sleep? Is it rest for the body or a journey for the soul?" He might smile at you, eyes twinkling, because he knows the answer isn't the point. The point is to walk together in the question, to feel the softness of inquiry like a pillow under your head. So imagine you and Socrates climbing a small hill just outside the city. The Acropolis glows faintly in the distance, temples outlined against the stars. Socrates sits cross-legged on a patch of grass, his cloak bunched around him. He gestures for you to sit. The night breeze is cool, carrying the scent of olive trees and faint smoke from the last hearths burning out. He asks if you're comfortable. You nod. He nods back, satisfied. This is where your sleep story truly begins. Not with answers, but with a man who knew that questions themselves can be a lullaby. And as your eyes grow heavy, Socrates keeps speaking softly, gently, about things both profound and ridiculous. He muses about whether the moon has feelings, whether wisdom can be borrowed like a cup of wine, whether even the gods ever get confused about love. His voice is calm, his manner warm, and the night stretches long and quiet before you. The next evening, you find yourself back in Athens, perhaps at a gathering more lively than last night's quiet walk. There is wine, there are figs, there are people trying their best to look intelligent while also not choking on their olives. And there is Socrates, sitting comfortably, looking like he's never once cared about the opinions of a mirror. He listens for a while, letting others speak first. That's always how it starts. The host might say something flattering, like, "Socrates, you are the wisest among us." Socrates just chuckles and says, "Ah, but I know nothing." And the crowd laughs, because they think he's being humble. They don't realize he's deadly serious. Then, like clockwork, he asks a question. Tonight, it's about friendship. "Tell me," he says casually, as though discussing the weather, "what is friendship?" And the room freezes. It's the kind of silence you get when someone accidentally knocks over a vase at a funeral. Nobody was expecting philosophy with their goat cheese. One man, emboldened by wine, pipes up. Friendship is when people enjoy spending time together. Socrates tilts his head. So if two gamblers enjoy losing money together, They are friends? The man frowns, the wine suddenly less helpful. Another guest tries. Friendship is when you help each other. Socrates smiles gently. Do robbers who help each other escape the guards count as friends? Murmurs ripple through the room. The questions are not hostile, but they cut through assumptions like a sharp knife through soft bread. This is why Socrates was known for ruining parties. He couldn't help it. To him, it wasn't about being rude. It was about peeling back the layers of words until you found the truth, or at least realized how slippery truth can be. He believed that friendship, like virtue and justice, was too important to define sloppily. If we think we know but don't, then we're living with illusions. And illusions, Socrates thought, are dangerous, because they make us confident in falsehoods. So he kept asking, what makes someone a true friend? Is it usefulness? That would mean friendship is just a transaction, like trading sandals. Is it pleasure? That would fade when the pleasure fades. Is it goodness? But then, what is goodness? The questions spiral, gently, endlessly. Some guests are enthralled. Others are desperately wishing for a flute player to distract everyone. In modern terms, imagine Socrates showing up at your birthday party. You're trying to blow out candles, and he leans in to ask, but what is a birthday, really? He'd turn to your best friend and say, do you truly love them? Or do you love the feeling of loving them? Suddenly, the cake tastes a little less sweet, but beneath the comedy, there is something profound. Socrates wasn't just being difficult. He believed that true friendship, like true goodness, must be rooted in something deeper than convenience or fleeting joy. A friend is someone committed not just to you, but to the pursuit of truth alongside you. A friend challenges you, refuses to let you stay shallow, and shares in the struggle of becoming better. It's not the definition most Athenians wanted to hear, especially not with their mouths full of dates, but it's the one Socrates pressed them toward. He thought that without such examination, friendship becomes a performance, a fragile bond that crumbles at the first test. Real friendship, he hinted, is a philosophical partnership, a shared journey toward wisdom, even if that means being a little annoyed now and then. And so the party wears on. Some people sneak out quietly, claiming early mornings. Others lean in, captivated. Socrates smiles, his eyes gleaming. For him, the question is not a party trick, but the essence of human life. To ask, to seek, to never settle for easy answers. And whether or not his companions agreed, they remembered him. They remembered the man who turned every gathering into an unexpected classroom. There is a certain sound you know all too well, though you may pretend not to. That brittle, airy chuckle your friends give after you've delivered what you thought was a stellar joke. You know the one, the kind of laugh that isn't quite a laugh but more like an allergic reaction in the throat. They tilt their head back slightly, make a noise that lasts half a second too long, and then quickly move the conversation elsewhere, as though your carefully crafted humor was a hot potato nobody wanted to hold. And in that moment, lying awake at night later, you wonder, were they truly laughing with me, or merely protecting me from the humiliation of my own punchline? This is the puzzle of human relationships. The slippery terrain Socrates would have delighted in stomping across barefoot. The inability to know what dwells in another person's heart is one of the central mysteries of friendship. People laugh at your jokes. But do they laugh because you're funny? Or because they want to be polite? Do they smile because they're glad to see you? Or because smiling is cheaper than honesty? These are the kinds of uncomfortable, sleep-preventing questions Socrates would whisper in your ear right as you were about to drift off. And in his company, you'd find yourself both oddly soothed and mildly terrified. The Athenians were not immune to fake laughter. Imagine Socrates waddling into the marketplace, catching some poor craftsman by surprise. "Tell me, my friend," he might say, "what is beauty?" The craftsman, hammer in hand, probably chuckles nervously. It's the laugh of someone who didn't expect to be philosophically interrogated before lunch. He laughs, not because Socrates was particularly hilarious, he wasn't known for stand-up, but because it's easier to laugh and nod than to explain why you don't have time to redefine an entire concept while trying to sell sandals. That laugh is a mask, a social lubricant, a way of surviving a conversation without committing to it. You know this laugh in your own life. At work, when a colleague tells a story about their cat typing on their keyboard for the 15th time, you laugh. Not a genuine belly laugh, but a small puff of air that signals, "Yes, I recognize your humanity. Please don't hate me." Or perhaps your friend tries a new impression, maybe of Socrates himself, with bulging eyes and silly questions, and you chuckle dutifully. Later, alone, you wonder if anyone has ever genuinely found you funny, or if the whole world is engaged in a vast conspiracy to protect your feelings. Socrates, if invited to analyze this problem, would say that fake laughter is a perfect example of why we must constantly question appearances. The laugh looks real. The sound mimics joy. The timing matches the rhythm of genuine amusement. But underneath? Who knows? Maybe they were thinking about their dinner plans. Maybe they were hoping the laugh would stop you from telling another story. Maybe they were just being kind. In short, the laugh, like so much else in life, reveals very little on its own. To understand it, you must probe deeper. But let's be honest, probing laughter is a dangerous business. Imagine yourself at a party. You tell a joke, and the group titters politely. Socrates leans in and says, "Wait, are you laughing because the joke was truly funny, or because you wish to appear agreeable?" Suddenly, the room goes cold. Your friends shuffle their feet. Someone coughs. The host pretends to refill their wine glass just to escape. Socrates smiles, satisfied. You, however, are left wondering if you've ever been genuinely amusing in your entire life. Yet, as irritating as this sounds, there's something liberating in it too. To acknowledge that much of social life is built on polite facades is to relax a little about your own performance. Maybe they didn't laugh sincerely. So what? Maybe you didn't either. Maybe none of us are as sparklingly witty as we imagine. And maybe that's all right. Because for Socrates, the point of noticing the fake laughter wasn't to expose you as unfunny, but to remind you that what matters in friendship isn't the polite noise at the end of your sentence. What matters is whether the person beside you is committed to seeking truth with you, even when the truth is awkward or unflattering. Still, the thought of fake laughter lingers. You remember times when you laughed too hard at something you didn't even understand. Maybe it was nervousness. Maybe it was kindness. And you wonder, were those moments betrayals of authenticity, or were they tiny gifts you gave to others to smooth the rough edges of life? Socrates might argue both. He would say that fake laughter reveals our human discomfort with truth. We fear hurting others, so we hide behind the chuckle. We fear being judged, so we smile and laugh along. And while that might seem harmless, it also raises the deeper question: how often do we cover our real thoughts with polite sounds? How much of friendship is genuine, and how much is performance? It's here, in the shadow of these questions, that your eyelids grow heavy, because the truth is that the answer may never come. Socrates never gave clear answers. He gave you the tools to notice the gaps. And maybe that's enough. Perhaps your friend's laughter is real, perhaps not. But as you drift toward sleep, you realize the important thing is not whether you are always funny, but whether you are willing to laugh at yourself, even if nobody else truly does. Let us turn to a story that has echoed through centuries like a cosmic inside joke. The day Socrates was roasted by the gods themselves. Well, not exactly roasted, though, given the Athenian sun. That too, but humbled, in a way that only an oracle can manage. The setting is Delphi, a place where mortals went to seek divine answers from the mysterious Pythia, the priestess who spoke for Apollo. Imagine a temple shimmering with incense smoke, golden tripods, and the low murmur of hopeful petitioners waiting to hear the truth about their futures. Would their crops grow? Would their wars succeed? Would their mother-in-law finally move out? These were the kinds of burning questions brought before the oracle. One day, a friend of Socrates, a man named Chaerephon, traveled to Delphi with a peculiar question. He asked the oracle, "Who is the wisest man in Athens?" And the oracle, without hesitation, replied, "No one is wiser than Socrates." Now, if you were Socrates, you might have been flattered. Perhaps you'd update your resume immediately. Perhaps you'd strut around Athens, introducing yourself as Socrates, officially the wisest. But Socrates did not react that way. Instead, he was disturbed. He thought, surely not. How could he, a man who claimed to know nothing, be the wisest? Surely there were generals who knew the art of war, poets who knew the craft of verse, craftsmen who knew their trades. How could a man with no specialty, except asking awkward questions, be the wisest in Athens? Socrates, being Socrates, decided to test the oracle's statement. He took it as a kind of divine puzzle. He went around Athens, interrogating the so-called experts. He visited politicians, asking them about justice. They answered confidently, but after a few questions, their arguments collapsed like a badly baked loaf of bread. He went to poets, asking them about beauty. They recited verses with passion, but when pressed to explain the meaning, they admitted they didn't really know what they were talking about. He went to craftsmen, who certainly knew their trades, but when asked about wisdom in general, they overstepped, claiming knowledge beyond their craft. Socrates gently but relentlessly showed them their limits, and each time he came away with the same realization. They thought they knew, but they did not. They had confidence without understanding, knowledge of words without clarity of concepts. Socrates realized that, compared to them, he did have a kind of wisdom not because he knew everything, but because he knew that he did not know. His ignorance was honest, his wisdom lay in admitting its boundaries. In a way, this was the universe's greatest roast. The gods had declared him the wisest, not because he was full of answers, but because he was full of questions. His wisdom was a kind of anti-wisdom, a negative knowledge. He knew his ignorance, and that made him wiser than those who dressed up their ignorance in elaborate speeches. Imagine for a moment if the oracle existed today. You ask, "Who is the wisest person alive?" And the oracle answers, "The one who knows their Google searches don't make them an expert." Suddenly, your cousin with a blog about cryptocurrency doesn't look so clever. The modern parallel is clear. Socrates was the original fact-checker, humbly aware of his own limitations while exposing the pretensions of others. This story became central to Socrates' mission. He walked the streets, not as a self-proclaimed guru, but as someone burdened with a divine duty to test the oracle's words. If he was the wisest, it was only because he confessed his ignorance and invited others to do the same. Of course, Athenians didn't always appreciate this. Nobody likes being told, politely or otherwise, that they don't know what they think they know. It's the philosophical equivalent of someone correcting your grammar at dinner. And yet, the story of the oracle reminds us of something strangely comforting. You don't need to know everything. You don't need to pretend. Wisdom is not about hoarding facts or dazzling others with speeches. It is about humility, honesty, and the courage to admit that the universe is too vast for any of us to fully grasp. Socrates turned ignorance into a kind of serenity. And perhaps, as you drift towards sleep, that serenity is yours too. Because in this moment, you don't need to solve every riddle of existence. You just need to admit, with a smile, that you don't know, and that not knowing is strangely, beautifully enough. There is something irresistibly attractive about someone who refuses to accept your first answer. Not in the way of a nosy aunt who insists on knowing why you're still single, but in the way of Socrates, who leaned in with those wide, owl-like eyes and asked, "Yes? But what do you mean by that?" His friends would roll their eyes, his students would sigh, the politicians would sweat. And yet, they couldn't look away. Somehow, these questions, these relentless little pebbles, tossed into the calm pond of everyday conversation, created ripples that made life feel sharper, clearer, more alive. And that is why, strange as it may sound, annoying questions are, in their own philosophical way, sexy. Now, of course, when I say sexy, I don't mean Socrates himself. By all accounts, he was not going to win a modeling contract. He had a bald head, bulging eyes, and a belly that spoke fondly of bread and wine. People compared him to a satyr, those mischievous woodland creatures who were half man, half goat, and not the glamorous kind of goat either. Yet when he opened his mouth and began to ask questions, something shifted. He drew people in. They couldn't help but listen, because his questions made their own minds feel powerful. The technique he used has since been named the Socratic method, though Socrates would probably laugh at that, because he never thought of himself as creating a system. He thought of it as a kind of midwifery for the mind. His mother, after all, had been a midwife, and he saw his role as helping other people give birth to the truths they already carried inside. He didn't implant wisdom. He teased it out, gently, persistently, like coaxing a shy cat out from under the bed. Imagine you are in conversation with him. You say something perfectly ordinary, like, "Courage is fighting in battle." He nods and asks softly, "So is a soldier who fights recklessly, charging into danger without thought, courageous or merely foolish?" You pause. The definition wobbles. You try again. "Courage is knowing the risks and facing them anyway." He smiles. "And what of the doctor who risks her reputation to tell an unpopular truth? Is that also courage, though no blood is spilled?" End quote. And slowly, you begin to feel your mind stretching like a muscle you didn't know you had. The definition grows, shifts, becomes more flexible. And suddenly, you are more alive in the act of thinking than you were in all the battles you imagined. This is why the questions were alluring. They weren't just obstacles thrown at you. They were invitations. Each one said, "Come with me deeper. Let's see what lies beneath your easy answers." And though it could feel irritating in the moment, like being asked repeatedly why the sky is blue when you just wanted to enjoy the sunset, it left behind a strange satisfaction. You realized you had been taken seriously, treated not as a passive listener, but as a co-conspirator in the adventure of wisdom. There is, of course, humor in it too. Imagine Socrates on a modern date. You tell him, "I like Italian food." He leans in. And what, my dear, is food? Is it sustenance, pleasure, or a combination of both? And what makes Italian food Italian? The soil? The recipes? The grandmother behind the stove? By this point, your pasta is cold. But you're also strangely captivated, because you've never had anyone make spaghetti feel so philosophical. His questions might ruin the meal, but they would make the memory unforgettable. The sexy part, if we can call it that, lies in the vulnerability he demanded. To be questioned by Socrates was to be stripped of your rehearsed speeches and your borrowed definitions. It was to stand, trembling, in the naked light of, "I don't know." And that moment, though humbling, was strangely intimate. It meant someone had cared enough to push past your mask and see you fumbling. Human. Searching for truth. What could be more intimate than that? As you sink deeper into the cushions of your bed, you can feel the rhythm of his questions, as though they were lullabies. Each one peels away a layer, not to expose you in cruelty, but to free you from the heavy garments of certainty. He reminds you, gently, that not knowing is not failure. It is the first step toward wisdom. That strange mix of humility and curiosity is what makes his method not only effective, but undeniably appealing. So yes, annoying questions can be maddening. They can ruin a dinner party, make you squirm, or leave you lying awake, wondering whether you've ever truly defined love. But they are also what make life feel charged, vibrant, worth living. And as you drift toward sleep, you might find yourself whispering the most Socratic thing of all, that in admitting you don't know, you discovered just how much you want to. Picture this. You've shared your Netflix password with a friend. At first, it felt generous. They couldn't afford the subscription, and you thought, what harm could it do? But months later, you realize they've watched entire series without once inviting you to join. Worse still, when you suggest a movie night, they groan and say, "I've already seen it." You begin to wonder, are they truly your friend, or are they just in this for the streaming benefits? This modern dilemma is the perfect doorway into one of Socrates' favorite themes: the difference between friendships of utility and friendships of genuine connection. The Athenians didn't have Netflix, but they had similar concerns. They shared wine, advice, sometimes even money. And always the question lingered, is this person in my life because they love me or because they love what I provide? Socrates, through conversations recorded by Plato and others, teased apart the categories. A friendship of utility is like a business arrangement with better lighting. Two people stay close because they are useful to each other. One provides status, the other resources. One has influence in politics. The other makes excellent cheese. These friendships can be warm, even affectionate, but they are fragile. When the usefulness disappears, so does the bond. Then there are friendships of pleasure. These are the companions who make you laugh, who share a glass of wine under the stars, who fill the hours with joy. These are lovely, but also fleeting. When the pleasures fade, when the jokes grow stale, when distance intervenes, when life shifts, the friendship often drifts away too. And then, Socrates suggested, there is a higher form. Friendship based on goodness, on mutual recognition of each other's striving for virtue. This is the kind of friend who challenges you to be better, who sticks by you, not because you are useful or entertaining, but because they love the core of who you are, the part that seeks truth. These are rare, difficult, sometimes demanding, but they endure. They are not shaken by the loss of utility, nor dimmed by the fading of pleasures. Now, imagine applying this to your Netflix friend. If they only call you when a new season of their favorite show drops, perhaps you are in a friendship of utility. If they invite you to binge-watch comedies and eat snacks until your stomach hurts, that might be a friendship of pleasure. But if, one night, after the credits roll, they turn to you and say, "This story made me think about justice, about love, about how we live our lives," and they want to wrestle with those questions beside you, then perhaps, just perhaps, you have stumbled into that rarer category, the friendship rooted in goodness. Socrates knew how difficult it was to find such friends. Athens was full of acquaintances, companions, allies of convenience. But to find someone who would not abandon you when your status fell, who would still sit with you even if you had no bread to share, who would keep asking you questions and listening to your fumbling answers, that was a treasure. Of course, this doesn't mean you should cancel all friendships that involve snacks or shared passwords. Socrates wasn't a cynic. He enjoyed symposia, those drinking parties full of laughter and debate. He valued the lighter bonds of pleasure, but he cautioned against mistaking them for the deepest form of friendship. Without clarity, we risk disappointment. We expect permanence from relationships built on temporary benefits. As you drift into sleep, imagine Socrates sitting cross-legged at the end of your bed. Grinning, he asks, "Do your friends love you? Or the warmth of your fire? Do they care for your soul? Or for your login credentials?" He's not judging you. He never claimed to know the answers. He is inviting you to notice, to sift, to ask. And in asking, perhaps you'll discover that even if some friends were just here for the streaming, others are here for you, in all your messy, searching humanity. There is something almost paradoxical about the way philosophy, which is supposed to stir up your mind, can instead tuck it in like a warm blanket. Most people imagine that thinking deeply is the enemy of sleep. After all, isn't it the tossing and turning of the brain that keeps us awake at night? You lie there, staring at the ceiling, replaying conversations you had 5 years ago, wondering if the cashier thought you were rude for saying thanks too softly, or contemplating why you never finished that Duolingo streak in Spanish. On the surface, thought seems like the very thing that prevents rest. Yet Socrates, and philosophy itself, suggests the opposite. That thinking deeply, in the right way, is one of the most relaxing things you can do. Socrates knew this intimately. He was accused of stirring up trouble, of making the youth restless by filling their heads with questions. But in truth, his questions had a soothing rhythm to them. He wasn't handing down dogmas, shouting in the style of a street preacher. He was leading conversations the way you might lead a tired horse toward water, slowly, carefully, with a gentle tug here and there. It was a method of coaxing, not commanding. And as you followed his questions, your own anxieties softened, because you realized how little you really needed to know for sure. Take the classic Socratic moment when someone claims to know what Justice Island. They speak confidently, as people always do when they think they've nailed down an idea. But then Socrates asks, "Is justice always the interest of the stronger? What if the stronger make mistakes? Do we call their mistakes just two?" The person falters. Their words crumble. But instead of panic, there is a kind of relief. You thought you had to know what justice was. Now you see you don't, and that's all right. You realize you can live in the questioning, and there's something deeply restful in that. Because what keeps us awake at night is often the false conviction that we need all the answers. We think, "I must know what my future looks like. I must know what this person thinks of me. I must know what I should be doing with my life." The mind spins on this hamster wheel, exhausting itself. But Socrates whispers, "You don't know, and that's fine. In fact, no one does. The wisdom lies in knowing you don't." Suddenly, The hamster hops off the wheel and curls up in its sawdust. The relief is physical. Your shoulders unclench. The pressure to perform omniscience disappears. This is why philosophy works as a sleep aid. It doesn't solve every riddle of existence before bedtime. That would be exhausting. Instead, it lets you set the riddles down gently on the nightstand. Like a heavy book you don't have to finish tonight. You realize you are not responsible for carrying the weight of the universe on your fragile spine. You just have to be honest about what you know and what you don't. That honesty, strange as it seems, lulls the mind. Of course, Socrates also had a sense of humor about it. He was famous for standing stock still, in thought for hours, even overnight. His fellow soldiers during the Peloponnesian War once found him standing barefoot in the snow, completely lost in contemplation, as if his brain had wrapped itself in a warm cocoon while his toes froze. And yet, he seemed utterly content. Thinking for him was as restorative as sleep itself. He didn't need distraction, didn't need entertainment. His questions were enough to carry him into a kind of mental dreamland. You may have experienced this too, perhaps without realizing it. Think about the last time you got caught in a long, slow train of thought, wondering about the stars, or imagining what animals would say if they could talk, or puzzling over why toast always lands butter side down. It's hypnotic. Your breath slows. The brain, instead of whirring anxiously, begins to hum. You drift in the rhythm of curiosity, and before you know it, your body slides towards sleep. So yes, philosophy can be annoying at times. Nobody likes having their definitions pulled apart right after dessert. But when you're lying in bed, eyes heavy, Socrates' questions are like waves on a shore. They roll in, lap against your assumptions, and then recede, leaving you lighter, cleaner, more relaxed. Thinking deeply, the Socratic way, is not about clinging to answers. It's about letting go of the need for them. And that letting go is what carries you softly into sleep. Imagine yourself wandering through Athens on a bright morning. The sun glints off marble statues. The air hums with the chatter of vendors, and the smell of freshly baked bread mingles with the less charming scent of goats. It's a city alive with commerce, color, and conversation. And somewhere among the stalls of figs and amphorae, there is Socrates, barefoot and beaming, ready to ruin someone's morning with a perfectly timed question. You see him stop at the booth of a baker, who is dusting flour from his beard. Socrates smiles and asks, "Tell me, my friend, what is love?" The baker, holding a loaf still warm from the oven, blinks. He expected to discuss the price of barley, not the mysteries of the human soul. He laughs nervously, thinking perhaps this strange man is joking. But no, Socrates waits patiently, eyes fixed, as though the answer might rise like yeast if given enough time. The baker tries. "Love," he says, "is like bread. It nourishes us." Socrates nods, then tilts his head. "But bread can also make us ill if it is stale or moldy. Is love, too, sometimes harmful?" The baker stammers. The customers in line shift uncomfortably, glancing at each other, wondering if they should just grab a loaf and run. And yet, the conversation rolls on. Socrates isn't mocking. He is genuinely curious. For him, the marketplace isn't just a place to buy olives. It's a place to cultivate wisdom. Later, he wanders toward the clang of a blacksmith's hammer. The blacksmith is strong, sweat glistening on his arms, sparks flying around him. Socrates leans against the doorway and asks, "What is justice?" The blacksmith wipes his brow, sighing. "Justice is when everyone gets what they deserve." Socrates nods. "And who decides what each person deserves? Is it you Me or the gods? The blacksmith, used to hammering iron, now finds himself hammered by questions. He grumbles, but he keeps answering, because there is something magnetic about being taken so seriously. This was Socrates' gift. He turned the ordinary into the extraordinary. A loaf of bread became an allegory. A hammer strike became a metaphor. He showed that wisdom wasn't locked in the temples of the elite or the books of scholars. It was hidden in plain sight, waiting in the conversations of everyday people. You didn't need a classroom, you needed curiosity. And curiosity could bloom anywhere, even between haggling over fish prices. Of course, not everyone appreciated this. Some Athenians rolled their eyes when they saw him coming, the way you might dodge a friend who always corners you about your life goals at the grocery store. They wanted to buy figs, not redefine love. They wanted justice to remain as sturdy and unquestioned as a blacksmith's anvil. Socrates disrupted the flow of business with his insistence on deeper truths. And yet, despite the irritation, people kept talking to him, because part of them longed for more than figs and sandals. They longed to stretch their minds the way they stretched dough, to test ideas the way they tested steel. The marketplace of Athens became, in Socrates' presence, a theater of philosophy. Every stall was a classroom. Every merchant, a student. And though many pretended annoyance, they carried his questions home with them, gnawing at their assumptions long after the bread had cooled and the hammers had stilled. As you imagine this scene, you may feel the rhythm of it yourself, the shuffle of feet on stone, the clatter of pottery, the gentle interruptions of Socrates weaving through the crowd like a mischievous but benevolent ghost. He isn't there to shame anyone. He's there to remind them that the search for wisdom belongs everywhere, even in the mundane bustle of daily life. And perhaps, as you close your eyes, you see him turning to you, offering his next question. It may feel inconvenient, but it is also strangely comforting, because when Socrates asks you about love or justice, he is reminding you that you, too, are part of the great conversation, even if you are only half awake in your bed. And in that thought, you find yourself lulled, gently, into sleep. There is a particular kind of silence that descends at dinner, when someone says something that just doesn't belong. Imagine a lovely evening, the table laid with roasted lamb, olives glistening with oil, wine flowing as freely as the gossip. The laughter rises. Someone makes a joke about politicians. Someone else adds a scandalous story about a poet, and everything is merry. Then, from one end of the couch, comes Socrates' unmistakable voice. But tell me, my friends, what is love? The forks, well, not forks, but skewers pause mid-air. A few guests smile nervously, thinking he must be joking. Someone mutters, always with the questions. Another takes a long drink of wine, as though hoping the cup might double as a shield. And yet, as always, Socrates is entirely serious. He leans forward, eyes bright, belly relaxed, and asks again, yes? But truly, what is love? This was the essence of the symposium in ancient Athens. It was not just dinner, but a whole event. Couches arranged in a circle, libations poured to the gods, music and dancing between courses. The wine was usually watered down, because even Athenians recognized the need for some moderation, though moderation was a relative term. And by the time the third jug was empty, moderation was usually just a memory. The purpose was not only indulgence but conversation. And yet, when you added Socrates to the guest list, the conversation tended to take a turn. He had a gift for ruining light chatter and turning it into an existential struggle. Picture him sitting across from you as you nibble on cheese, You're just trying to enjoy the evening, perhaps flirt a little, perhaps gossip about that new playwright who keeps making enemies. Then Socrates says, "Do you believe desire and love are the same thing? Or is one rooted in lack and the other in virtue?" Suddenly, the cheese curdles in your mouth. You glance at your neighbor, who shrugs helplessly, as if to say, "Here we go again." Wine, however, complicates matters. Wine makes philosophy simultaneously better and worse. Better, because inhibitions dissolve, and people who would normally flee from Socrates' interrogation now lean in, eager to prove their insight. Worse, because wine also makes confidence grow much faster than clarity. You get half-drunk aristocrats insisting they've discovered the true nature of beauty, followed by contradictory rambling about why sandals should always be worn in pairs. Socrates, patient as ever, just smiles and asks another question, gently stripping away their bravado until they are left tipsy and humbled, admitting they don't actually know what they thought they knew. Plato's Symposium gives us one of the most famous accounts of these dinners. There, each guest was asked to give a speech in praise of love. The speeches ranged from poetic to absurd. One claimed love was the oldest of the gods. Another argued love was a force for order in the universe. One man, more theatrical than wise, told a story about humans once being double-bodied creatures, split apart by Zeus, forever seeking their other halves. And then came Socrates, calmly reporting what he had learned from a wise woman, Diotima, that love begins with physical attraction, but can ascend toward something higher, the love of wisdom, the love of truth itself. Love, in other words, was not just romance or desire, but the ladder that could carry the soul from the earthly to the divine. Of course, all of this was discussed while reclining on couches, sipping wine, with the occasional flute girl playing music in the background. Imagine talking about the metaphysical ladder of love while someone is juggling figs behind you. That was the paradox of the symposium. Profound questions unfolding in the midst of indulgence, philosophy, and laughter, blending like wine and water. But the awkwardness was real. Not everyone came to dinner expecting to be questioned into humility. Many wanted entertainment, easy compliments, a sense of their own brilliance confirmed by friends. Socrates offered none of that. He offered instead the strange intimacy of stripping away illusions. It was awkward, yes, but it was also unforgettable. Guests may have left the symposium shaking their heads, but they carried his questions with them into the night, long after the last drops of wine had been drained. If you've ever been to a dinner where someone brings up politics or religion at the wrong moment, you know the feeling. Everyone else was happy discussing vacations or television. But suddenly, the room is charged, uncomfortable, a little too real. That was Socrates, every single time. Yet unlike your uncle at Thanksgiving, Socrates had a way of making even the awkwardness beautiful. His questions, once they were asked, could not be unasked, and in that way, he transformed awkward dinner conversations into seeds of wisdom, planted in the fertile soil of shared bread and wine. As you drift toward sleep, picture yourself there, reclining, the hum of conversation all around, the warmth of wine in your belly. Socrates turns his gaze toward you, smiling, and asks you something simple, yet impossible. You stumble through an answer, laugh at yourself, blush a little, but feel strangely alive. The awkwardness softens, the night stretches on, and in that blend of food, drink, and inquiry, philosophy becomes not a lecture, but a lullaby. If you want to understand friendship in Socrates' world, You have to imagine life stripped of all the things we take for granted. No phones buzzing with notifications, no texts to check in, no group chats to argue about where to meet. Friendship was not maintained with emojis or memes. It was carved into daily life through presence, conversation, and the willingness to actually sit with someone, face to face, with no distractions but the passing clouds overhead. For Socrates, friendship was not an accessory. It was the very ground on which philosophy grew. He didn't wander Athens, asking questions into empty air. He asked them of people companions, students, even strangers who became companions through dialogue. Friendship was the laboratory where ideas were tested, the warm hearth where truth was shared. Without friendship, philosophy would have been nothing more than lonely muttering. With it, philosophy became a shared adventure. Plato's dialogues are essentially transcripts of friendships in motion. You see Socrates bantering with young men, eager to prove themselves, challenging older statesmen who thought they had all the answers, and teasing his friends with questions that seemed harmless at first but opened into bottomless abysses. These friendships were not always comfortable. In fact, they were often deeply uncomfortable. But they were real. They had texture, gravity, and endurance. In our world, it's easy to confuse connectivity with connection. We mistake likes for love, comments for commitment. But in Athens, connection had to be lived in the flesh. A friend was someone who walked with you to the marketplace, who sat with you through long afternoons of questioning, who endured your fumbling attempts at wisdom without rushing to the next notification. Friendship was patience, embodied. Socrates believed that true friendship was rooted in the pursuit of virtue. Friends were not just drinking buddies or allies of convenience. They were fellow travelers toward the good. That meant a friend was someone who would not flatter you, who would not indulge your illusions, but who would challenge you, even annoy you, in order to help you grow. In this sense, Socratic friendship was more demanding than the casual companionships we often settle for. It was not about comfort. It was about transformation. Imagine two friends walking through Athens at dusk. One insists he knows what Courage Island. The other, channeling Socrates, begins to ask questions. Soon, the first friend is squirming, realizing his definition doesn't hold. He feels exposed, maybe embarrassed. But the second friend doesn't leave him there. He stays, continues the conversation, walks beside him, until the awkwardness gives way to a new insight. That is friendship without Wi-Fi. The willingness to stay with each other, even when the signal is weak, even when the conversation lags, even when the truth takes longer to download than you'd like. Of course, this kind of friendship could look strange to outsiders. Some thought Socrates was corrupting the youth, making them question too much. Others thought he was just being difficult for the sake of it. But for those who entered his circle, the bond was undeniable. They were not united by hobbies or small talk. They were united by the shared love of truth, the willingness to risk their pride in order to learn together. And isn't that what we all long for? Even now, a friend who doesn't just send you the latest meme, but who listens to your confusion, asks the hard questions, and doesn't abandon you when the answers don't come easily. A friend who isn't afraid to make things awkward because they care more about your soul than your comfort. A friend who would sit with you, barefoot in the dust of Athens, as the stars came out, and talk until the city slept. As you lie in bed, perhaps you feel the absence of notifications, the silence of the room. In that silence, imagine the kind of friendship Socrates cherished. Slow, steady, demanding, honest. No Wi-Fi required. Just two souls, side by side, walking toward the good, step by gentle step. Athens was never short on personalities. It was a city brimming with poets, generals, merchants, and gossip, all packed together like olives in a jar. And among them walked Socrates barefoot, unshaven, armed with nothing but questions and an inconvenient knack for peeling back the layers of people's confidence. It was only natural that he collected not just admirers, but also a long line of critics, hecklers, and passive-aggressive acquaintances who wished, at least occasionally, that he would simply stop talking. Imagine, if you will, the Athenian equivalent of a frenemy. It might be a politician who smiles at Socrates in the marketplace, but secretly dreads the inevitable moment when Socrates asks him to define justice in front of a crowd, or a wealthy man who enjoys inviting Socrates to dinner for the entertainment value because everyone loves watching him tie arrogant guests in logical knots, but also resents the fact that Socrates does it with such relentless ease. Or perhaps even a poet who laughs loudly at Socrates' jokes, then mutters under his breath that this shoeless man knows nothing about art. What's remarkable, though, is how Socrates dealt with them. He didn't snap back, didn't sulk, and didn't sharpen his words into daggers. Instead, he leaned into calmness, the way a tree leans into the wind. He listened, he asked questions, and he let the contradictions in his opponent's own words unravel them. His enemies wanted him angry. They wanted him flustered, humiliated, maybe even red in the face. But Socrates had no such vanity to protect. He had, in a sense, nothing to lose. He wore his ignorance openly, and that made him almost invincible. Picture a young Athenian swaggering into the agora, eager to impress a crowd by taking on the city's most famous questioner. He mocks Socrates, perhaps calls him a clown, maybe jokes about his appearance. The crowd laughs nervously. Socrates doesn't bristle. He doesn't trade insult for insult. Instead, he chuckles softly, as if the insult itself were an interesting puzzle, and then asks, "Tell me, my friend, what is a clown?" The heckler fumbles. He hadn't expected his jab to become the opening line of a conversation. And before long, Socrates has turned the insult into a philosophical dialogue that leaves the heckler red-faced and the crowd quietly astonished. This was his genius. Frenemies thrive on tension. They want drama, escalation, a duel of egos. Socrates never gave them that satisfaction. He was like a philosophical Aikido master, using their own momentum against them. They charged with arrogance, and he sidestepped with humility. They expected him to defend his honor, and instead he dismantled the very idea of honor until they weren't sure what they were defending anymore. Even in the courtroom, when his life was on trial, he maintained this calm. The charges were serious: corrupting the youth, impiety toward the gods. His accusers were powerful men with reputations to protect. Yet Socrates didn't grovel or flatter. He didn't curse them either. He simply stood there and explained, as calmly as if he were in the marketplace, why he had spent his life questioning, why he believed he was serving the city rather than harming it. He even joked, famously suggesting that, instead of being punished, he should be rewarded with free meals for life, because his questioning was a service to Athens. That's the kind of humor that only a man at peace with himself could deliver. Of course, his calmness didn't make him immune. His enemies eventually succeeded in condemning him to death. But even then, Socrates met the moment without bitterness. He drank the hemlock as though it were simply the next step in the argument, the logical conclusion to a life lived in pursuit of truth. His friends wept. He reassured them. His critics jeered. He didn't lash out. It was not bravado, it was consistency. He had always said that death was nothing to fear if one had lived in truth, and he showed that he meant it. It's tempting to imagine what it would be like to face our own frenemies with such calm. Picture the coworker who makes snide remarks in meetings. Instead of snapping back, you lean in with a Socratic smile and ask them to define what they mean by unrealistic. Picture the relative who can't resist passive-aggressive comments at dinner. Instead of rolling your eyes, you softly probe. What exactly do you mean by interesting life choices? Suddenly, the power dynamic shifts. They wanted you flustered. Instead, you've invited them to think. Socrates reminds us that calmness isn't weakness. It's a strength that disarms hostility. By refusing to play the game of insults, he rewrote the rules of every encounter. His frenemies wanted to drag him into a contest of pride. He led them, gently but relentlessly, into a contest of ideas. And in that realm, he always had the upper hand. Not because he claimed to know more, but because he was willing to admit what he didn't know. As you settle deeper into bed, you might find some of your own critics drifting into your mind. The voices of those who've mocked, doubted, or underestimated you. Let Socrates' calmness wash over you. Let his example remind you that you don't need to meet hostility with hostility. Sometimes, the most powerful response is to stay steady, to ask a question, to smile. Like Socrates, you can let the noise pass by, while you remain anchored in something deeper than pride. And in that thought, your eyelids grow heavy, your breath steadies, and you slip toward rest. Now, let us turn inward into that hazy space between wakefulness and dreams. Imagine Socrates has pulled up a little stool beside your bed. He is not here to lecture or accuse. He is here to ask you questions. Questions that start serious, then become stranger and sillier, until they dissolve into the kind of gentle nonsense that dreams are made of. This is the sleepy Socratic method, where the aim is not to sharpen your mind, but to soften it, until thought itself drifts into lullaby. He begins simply. Tell me, what is sleep? You murmur something about rest. He nods. And is rest merely the absence of activity, or is it a kind of activity of the soul? You fumble for an answer, but your brain is already tired. He chuckles. Very well. Then what is dreaming? Is it memory, imagination, or the whisper of some other world? You start to wonder, but his voice is gentle, his pace slow, and instead of tension you feel your body loosening. The questions keep coming, weaving around you like a blanket. What is comfort? Is it the softness of your pillow, or the quiet of your mind? What is time? Do you feel it pass as you drift, or does it vanish when you close your eyes? Each question is an invitation, not a demand. You don't have to answer. In fact, the less you answer, the more peaceful it becomes. Socrates leans in again, mischief twinkling in his eyes. Tell me, is a yawn contagious because of the body or the soul? And if so, why am I now yawning? He yawns theatrically, and you can't help but smile in the darkness. The seriousness is slipping into play. He asks, if a blanket covers your toes, but not your heels, is it truly a blanket, or merely fabric with delusions of grandeur? You laugh softly, then sigh, your breath slowing. The questions become dreamlike. Is the moon jealous of the sun's applause, or does she prefer her quiet audience of owls? If sheep dream, do they count humans to fall asleep? If your pillow could talk, what would it say about your secrets whispered into it at night? The images are absurd, but comforting. Like clouds shaped into animals, drifting lazily across the sky of your thoughts. Socrates doesn't push. He doesn't require you to stay alert. He lets the questions float over you, like feathers settling slowly. Each one is lighter than the last. Soon, they are barely questions at all, just gentle curiosities. What is warmth? What is stillness? What is this moment between waking and sleep? You don't need to answer. You can let the questions fade. The sleepy Socratic method isn't about finding truth tonight. It's about letting inquiry dissolve into calm until the boundaries between thought and dream blur, and you are carried effortlessly across that threshold. In this drowsy state, the world softens. Socrates' voice is no longer distinct words but the soothing rhythm of sound, rising and falling like the tide. The questions are the waves. They wash over you. They recede. They leave you heavier in your body, lighter in your mind. You close your eyes fully now. Your breath is slow, your limbs heavy, your heart steady. And Socrates' last question lingers like a lullaby. What is sleep, if not wisdom in disguise? If there was one thing Socrates despised, it was the act of vanishing from responsibility. He lived in a world where loyalty and honesty were not just nice social traits, but the backbone of civic and personal life. And while Athenians did not have text messages, blue check marks, or that horrifying seen notification haunting the corner of your screen, they certainly had their own versions of disappearing acts. A friend could suddenly stop showing up to the marketplace. A student could quietly avoid debates. A politician could conveniently slip away when the promises made in public became uncomfortable. In our modern language, we'd call that ghosting. And if Socrates were alive today, he would have made ghosting his personal enemy. Socrates believed that friendship, mentorship, and citizenship required constancy. If you committed to a bond, whether with a friend, a teacher, or your community, you owed it your presence. That didn't mean you had to flatter or nod along to every statement. In fact, Socrates would argue the opposite. True loyalty meant you stayed engaged, even when it was uncomfortable. To walk away without explanation, to vanish into silence, would have seemed to him a betrayal of the very trust that makes dialogue possible. Imagine the scene. A young Athenian has been spending weeks walking alongside Socrates, debating the meaning of courage or the nature of love. Then one day, the youth gets embarrassed. Perhaps Socrates has caught him in a contradiction, and instead of returning for tomorrow's conversation, he just disappears. Days pass. No word. Socrates, seeing him in the distance, calls out, "Come, let's continue our discussion." And the youth pretends to be suddenly very interested in a pile of figs. Socrates, of course, does not let this slide. He corners the boy in the agora and says, "Why avoid me? If you think I am wrong, stay and argue. If you think I am right, then all the more reason to remain. But do not abandon truth for the comfort of silence." That was his philosophy in action. Honesty over avoidance. He prized dialogue because it was the only way human beings could polish the rough edges of their souls. By questioning and answering, by correcting and being corrected, people grew together. To ghost someone was to deny them that chance. It was not only rude, it was anti-philosophical, and Socrates practiced what he preached. Even when his own life was on the line, he didn't ghost Athens. After being sentenced to death, his friends urged him to flee. They had arranged a way out. The guards could be bribed. Socrates could slip away into exile, avoiding execution. It was, in a sense, the ultimate opportunity to ghost an entire city. Yet he refused. Why? Because he believed he had made a lifelong contract with Athens by choosing to live there enjoy its laws, and raise his children in its streets. To vanish now, when those same laws had turned against him, would have been dishonorable. Better to drink the hemlock and stay true to his commitments than to abandon his city in silence. It's striking to think about how this principle might apply today. Ghosting often comes from fear. Fear of confrontation. Fear of hurting feelings. Fear of admitting what we really want. But Socrates would argue that real courage lies in staying, speaking, and explaining. To tell a friend honestly why you cannot continue the relationship is painful, but it honors their dignity. To vanish is easy, but it leaves wounds that fester in confusion. He also would have seen ghosting as a kind of self-deception. When you disappear rather than explain, you're not just hiding from the other person, you're hiding from yourself. You avoid seeing your own reasons clearly. Socrates taught that the unexamined life is not worth living. Ghosting, then, was a way of slipping back into unexamined existence, shutting the door on reflection. And that, for him, was a kind of death of the soul long before the body gave way. So in his world, no matter how awkward the conversation, no matter how sharp the disagreement, Socrates stayed. He was present. He confronted, but he also listened. He corrected, but he also invited correction. That constancy made him both annoying and beloved, both a thorn and a treasure. He would never ghost, not because he wanted to please everyone, but because he believed every relationship deserved the honesty of dialogue until the very end. As you drift toward sleep, you might think about your own connections, those that have grown silent, those that ended without words. Imagine Socrates beside you, gently shaking his head at those vanishing acts. He whispers, "Stay, speak, be present. Even when it is hard, it is better than silence." And with that whisper, you feel the weight of unspoken words ease, replaced by the calm of knowing that honesty, however imperfect, is always the more courageous path. There is a bedtime story told in the softest tones about a man who asked too many questions. His city adored him at first, laughed at his quirks, indulged his stubborn barefoot walks, but slowly, as the years passed, the questions began to sting. The young people imitated him. The older citizens grew irritated, and the powerful men, those whose reputations were built on never being questioned, started to feel threatened. And so, one day, Socrates found himself on trial, accused of crimes that were less about what he had done and more about what he had represented. The charges were dressed in seriousness: impiety, for not honoring the gods in the proper way, and corruption of the youth, for filling young minds with questions instead of obedience. But beneath them was something more familiar to us today: the fear of being exposed, the discomfort of having one's authority poked too many times. Socrates had not led an army against Athens. He had not stolen, or burned, or betrayed. What he had done was worse, at least in the eyes of the establishment. He had made people think for themselves. Imagine the trial, not as a loud courtroom drama, but as a strange kind of public performance. 300 jurors sat, ordinary citizens, called upon to decide his fate. The accusers stood tall, rehearsed, listing his supposed crimes. They painted him as dangerous, a corrupter, a mocker of traditions. They wanted the jury to see him not as a harmless old man with a tendency to ramble, but as a threat to the very fabric of the city. It was, in its way, the ancient form of cancel culture. A man pulled from the marketplace into the harsh light of judgment, not for violence or theft, but for his words. And how did Socrates respond? Not with apologies, not with groveling or attempts to flatter. He spoke calmly, as if the trial itself were just another symposium, another conversation. He admitted nothing except his devotion to questioning. He explained that he asked difficult questions because he believed a life without examination was empty. He told the jurors that he was like a gadfly to the city, biting at the great horse of Athens to keep it awake. It was not always comfortable, he admitted, but it was necessary. His defense was not designed to save his life. It was designed to remain true to his principles. He even went so far as to suggest that instead of punishing him, the city should feed him for free, as a benefactor who kept Athens alert and thoughtful. You can almost hear the gasp ripple through the crowd at such audacity. It was as though a man accused of treason had stood before his accusers and asked for a medal. Of course, this did not endear him to the jury. By a narrow vote, they convicted him. They gave him the chance to propose an alternative punishment, expecting him to suggest exile or a fine. But Socrates, still stubbornly honest, refused to flee or beg. He would not abandon Athens, nor pretend he had done wrong. The jury, exasperated, sentenced him to death. The image that lingers is not one of rage or bitterness, but of serenity. Socrates spent his last hours in conversation with friends, speaking about the soul, about the meaning of life and death. When the cup of hemlock was brought, he took it without trembling. He drank calmly, as if it were simply another step in the long conversation he had carried his whole life. His friends wept. He reminded them to be brave. His last words, reminding a companion to pay a debt to a god, were practical, almost humorous. Even in death, he refused to abandon the everyday honesty of life. The tale feels eerily modern. The idea that a society could decide to silence a voice, not because of violence but because of discomfort, because the questions were too sharp, too relentless, too unsettling. Cancel culture, ancient edition, was less about hashtags and more about hemlock. And yet, in both cases, the tension is the same. How much questioning can a community bear before it feels threatened? But here, told softly in the night, the story becomes less cautionary and more soothing. Because Socrates shows us that even when society turned against him, he did not turn against himself. He stayed consistent, calm, loyal to his mission. He showed that integrity is not about winning or surviving, but about refusing to betray what you know to be true. As you breathe deeply, sinking into your pillow, imagine Socrates walking calmly into the courtroom, smiling, asking questions even as the verdict loomed. Imagine him sipping the hemlock, not with despair, but with dignity, and let that dignity wrap around you like a blanket. His trial was not the end of his questioning. It was simply the moment when his life became the ultimate answer. And in that thought, you can rest, knowing that truth, though fragile, endures. There is a certain image that floats around when people think of Socrates' death. A wise old man, calm as a lake at dawn, lifting a cup to his lips as though he were sipping something gentle and herbal, something soothing like chamomile tea. The truth, of course, is that the cup was filled not with flowers but with hemlock, a poison as unforgiving as Athens' final judgment. And yet, even knowing this, there is something strangely comforting about the way Socrates approached that final drink. It is as though the universe itself leaned in, poured him a bitter brew, and he smiled politely before taking his last sip. You can picture the scene. The prison cell is not glamorous bare stone walls. A wooden bench, the faint smell of sweat and old straw. Friends surround him, their faces pale, their eyes swollen from tears. Outside, Athens hums with life. People arguing in the marketplace, children chasing each other down dusty streets, soldiers clanking in armor as they head to practice drills. But inside this little room, time seems suspended. It is just Socrates, his companions, and the cup that waits like an unwelcome guest. He does not rush. He does not tremble. Instead, he talks, as he always did. Philosophy was not something he did for show. It was his breath, his heartbeat. Even with death standing politely at the door, he asks questions. He speaks about the soul, about what comes after, about whether death is a dreamless sleep or a journey to another realm. He treats the poison as just another idea to examine. His calmness unsettles his friends more than the poison itself. They want to scream, to protest, to break the cup, to drag him away. But Socrates gently reminds them that he has chosen this path, that fleeing or resisting would betray everything he had taught them. And then the cup arrives. It is not delicate porcelain, not a dainty teacup you might cradle with 2 hands. It is a simple prison vessel, perhaps clay, perhaps wood, filled with liquid that smells sharp, earthy, and dangerous. If you've ever made tea with too many herbs, too many dried stems, you know the scent. Except this time, it carries the promise not of comfort, but of stillness. Socrates takes it without complaint. He jokes, perhaps, about the taste, because he was never one to pass up a well-timed remark. Then he drinks, steady and calm, as though it were indeed chamomile, as though it were a lullaby in liquid form. The poison works slowly, beginning at the feet, creeping upward like a tide of sleep. His companions watch in agony as he describes the sensation, almost clinically, as though he were commenting on a philosophical problem. It seems, he says, that my legs are growing heavy. It is the philosopher's way of leaving, narrating even his own death as a conversation. No panic, no thrashing, just steady words, calm breath, a man being consistent to the very end. And there, in that strange moment, the dark comedy of it all shines through. Socrates spent his life pestering people, asking questions that made them uncomfortable, poking at their confidence. And in the end, Athens responded in the most final way possible. They gave him a drink to shut him up. But he turned even that into a teaching moment, making his death the last and greatest question. What is it to die? Is it the end? Or is it simply a change, a passage, a doorway to another conversation in another world? It is oddly soothing, this picture of him drinking what we might call hemlock tea, because what he shows is that even the bitterest cup can be faced with dignity. It is not about denying the bitterness. It is about sipping it calmly, without flinching, and allowing it to do what it must. In that sense, the scene becomes less tragic and more like a bedtime ritual. The day ends, the questions pause, the cup is lifted, and sleep arrives. Not forever, perhaps, but long enough to let the restless mind rest. So when you lie in bed tonight, you can think of Socrates lifting that cup, his friends weeping, his voice steady. You can think of the way he refused to turn death into an enemy, choosing instead to greet it like a final guest at the table. And in that thought, you may feel your own body soften, your own breath slow, as if some small part of his calmness has seeped into your own restless heart. There comes a point, lying in the dark, when your mind drifts beyond the small details of the day, beyond the emails unanswered, the chores half finished, the conversations replayed, and begins to wander into the vastness. You look at the ceiling, or at the stars if you're lucky, and you feel the tug of the cosmic question, does any of this matter? If we are all, eventually, dust, if our laughter, our quarrels, Our friendships dissolve into the great silence of time. Why should we care so much? Socrates never shied away from such questions. He would have leaned into the darkness beside you, his voice steady, his eyes curious, and asked it outright. What is the value of friendship if the universe forgets us? It is not a cruel question, though it may sound heavy. It is, in fact, the kind of question that can soothe because it pulls you out of the tiny anxieties and places you gently in the great expanse of perspective. Think of it this way. On a cosmic scale, we are indeed small. Stars burn and die. Galaxies swirl. Entire civilizations rise and vanish. And somewhere in all of this, two people sit together, sharing bread, or laughter, or silence. From one view, it is almost absurdly insignificant. And yet, from another view, it is the most profound thing imaginable. For even in a universe of dust, there is a moment of connection that pierces the void. Socrates would remind us that the value of friendship is not measured in permanence. Nothing mortal is permanent. Not bodies, not cities, not even mountains that crumble over ages. The value lies in the present act of connection. To share yourself with another person, even for a fleeting hour, is to create meaning that exists fully in its moment. That moment may not echo across eternity, but it fills the now with richness. Picture two friends walking the dusty roads of Athens at sunset. The city behind them, the fields ahead, the sky glowing with colors that will vanish in minutes. They talk about courage, or love, or perhaps nothing at all. Their words scatter into the air, carried away by the breeze. The world forgets them. But in that moment, they are entirely alive, entirely connected. Dust. Perhaps in the long run, but dust, illuminated by golden light before it settles. This is where the cosmic perspective becomes soothing rather than despairing. If nothing lasts forever, then the pressure to make everything eternal dissolves. You don't need to carve your friendships into stone. You don't need to prove they will echo through history. You only need to be present in them. Here, now, fully. The laughter, the honesty, the companionship that is the meaning, even if it does not outlive the stars. And here is the hidden comfort. If all things become dust, then so do our mistakes, our regrets, our awkward moments, our small betrayals. The embarrassing story you told at dinner? Dust. The argument you had with your friend last week? Dust. The guilt you carry for not being enough? Dust, too. What remains is not the weight of eternity, but the simple grace of being together while we can. Socrates often spoke of the soul, and whether it might survive beyond death. He did not pretend to know for certain, but he did insist that living well meant caring for the soul here, now, in the company of others. Friendship mattered not because it lasted forever, but because it helped us live more truthfully in the moments we had. Friends challenge us, comfort us, reflect us back to ourselves. Even if the universe forgets, we remember each other, and that is enough. So as you sink deeper into your pillow, let the cosmic perspective wash over you. Yes, we are dust, but we are dust that loves, dust that laughs, dust that asks questions under the stars, and in the gentle presence of a friend, whether near or far, awake or remembered, you can feel the meaning of existence settle softly, like starlight, on your chest. That feeling is not forever, but tonight, it is everything. There is something delicious about admitting you don't know. At first, it feels terrifying, like standing in front of the class without your homework, or confessing that you still don't fully understand how taxes work. But then, once you've said the words out loud, "I don't know," a strange wave of relief washes over you. The pressure evaporates, the expectation dissolves, and suddenly, you are free. You are no longer the keeper of an answer you never had. You're simply a human being, honest and curious, with space to breathe. Socrates built his entire reputation on this very thing. When the oracle at Delphi proclaimed him the wisest man in Athens, Socrates did not puff out his chest and declare himself a genius. He scratched his head, looked down at his calloused toes, and said something like, "Well, if I am wise at all, it is only because I know I do not know." And that, paradoxically, became his superpower. Not knowledge, but ignorance honestly confessed. This superpower is underrated. In our world, everyone is under pressure to know something. At dinner parties, you're expected to have opinions on politics, climate change, or at least the best kind of oat milk. At work, you're supposed to know the latest jargon, the buzzwords, the right way to nod thoughtfully in meetings. Even in friendships, people sometimes pretend to know more than they do, just to seem competent or clever. The result? A mind constantly straining, constantly juggling the heavy weight of appearances. And at night, when the lights are off, that weight presses down, keeping you awake. Socrates shows us another way. Imagine lying in bed, staring at the ceiling, feeling the questions piling up. Did I say the wrong thing earlier? Am I making the right life choices? Should I floss more often? The anxiety builds, demanding answers you don't have. Then imagine saying, with Socratic calm, "I don't know." Just that. A simple release. You don't know if the person you texted will reply. You don't know if tomorrow will go smoothly. You don't know what the future holds. And that's okay. The world does not collapse when you admit it. Instead, the world softens. Admitting ignorance is like taking off a pair of too tight shoes. You didn't realize how much they pinched until you let them go. Suddenly, your steps are lighter. Your breath deeper. Ignorance, far from being a failure, becomes a kind of freedom. You don't need to wrestle the universe into submission with your tiny fists. You can simply rest in the truth that you are small, and the universe is big, and your job is not to know everything but to wonder at it. And here is where the humor comes in. Socrates was constantly embarrassing people by exposing their false certainty. A politician would declare confidently what justice was, and Socrates would ask a few questions until the man tripped over his own words. A poet would boast of wisdom, and Socrates would ask what their poem really meant, only to watch them shrug helplessly. People grew frustrated, even angry. But Socrates, for all his mischief, wasn't mocking them cruelly. He was inviting them into the very freedom he cherished. The freedom of saying, "I don't know." The irony is that once you admit ignorance, you actually begin to learn. The mind relaxes, open like soil, ready for seed. But in the context of sleep, the benefit is even more immediate. That mental hamster wheel of trying to figure everything out, it stops spinning the moment you whisper, "I don't know." You don't know why your boss looked at you strangely. You don't know if your life plan is perfect. You don't know why socks go missing in the laundry. And in that humility, the anxiety loses its teeth. You can finally rest. Socrates would approve. He believed ignorance was not an obstacle to wisdom, but its foundation. Only by admitting what you don't know can you begin to search honestly. And only by releasing the need to know everything right now can you allow your mind to settle, like water in a glass, until it reflects the moonlight calmly. So as you breathe deeply, as your eyelids grow heavy, let ignorance be your pillow tonight, adorned not with shame, but with freedom. For in truth, "I don't know," might be the most comforting lullaby of all. It might sound odd to connect the lofty ideals of Socratic philosophy with something as ordinary as fluffing a pillow. But that is exactly the kind of connection Socrates himself would have enjoyed. He was never content to leave big ideas floating in the clouds. He tugged them down into the dust of everyday life, placing them right in front of bakers, blacksmiths, or, in your case, the folds of your bedding. Socrates believed that truth was not abstract, but lived. It was not a scroll hidden in a temple, but a conversation shared between friends. And friendship, in his world, was more than camaraderie. It was the shared pursuit of truth. A friend was not someone who told you only what you wanted to hear, but someone who stayed with you as you wrestled with the hard questions, someone who loved you enough to let you be uncomfortable if it meant you would grow. That kind of honesty, though sometimes awkward, was the bedrock of loyalty. Now imagine that kind of friendship translated into the language of bedtime. You crawl into bed. Pillow, a little lumpy blanket askew. A shallow friend, the flattering type, might say, "Your pillow is fine. Don't worry about it." You'd smile, but secretly you'd know your neck will ache in the morning. A true Socratic friend, however, would laugh softly and say, "That pillow needs work, my dear. Let's fix it." And together you'd fluff it until it cradled your head properly. That honesty, though perhaps less comfortable in the moment, brings the real comfort that lasts through the night. Friendship, truth, and pillow fluffing all share this quality. They are acts of care, rooted in honesty. A friend who tells you the truth is like the pillow that actually supports you. It may take some adjusting, but it holds you steady. A friend who lies or disappears is like the pillow that looks fluffy but deflates as soon as you rest on it. The difference is felt not in appearances, but in the long, quiet hours that follow. Socrates often spoke of friendship as a mirror for the soul. Through your friends, you see yourself more clearly. Sometimes that reflection is flattering. Sometimes it reveals wrinkles you'd rather not acknowledge. But either way, it grounds you in reality, just as you need a pillow to reflect the true shape of your head in order to rest. You need friends to reflect the true shape of your soul in order to live honestly. There is humor in this too. Picture Socrates himself in a modern bedroom, watching you fluff your pillow with that familiar half-smile. He'd probably ask, "What is fluffing? Is it the restoration of form or the pursuit of softness? And is a pillow truly a pillow if it cannot give comfort?" You'd roll your eyes, pat the pillow one last time and say, "Just let me sleep, Socrates." But even as you drift off, you'd know that his questions were nudging you toward a deeper truth. Comfort and honesty are not opposites, but companions. So as you lie there tonight, your pillow adjusted, your body sinking into rest, think of friendship in the Socratic sense. Not shallow convenience, not empty compliments, but the gentle, persistent pursuit of truth. Together. That kind of friendship is like the perfectly fluffed pillow. It doesn't erase the weight of life, but it supports you through it. And in that support, in that honesty, you find yourself safe enough to finally close your eyes. The night can be a strange and slippery thing. You lie down, exhausted, expecting to fall straight into sleep, but instead your mind decides it's time for an unscheduled symposium. Every worry, every half-finished task, every embarrassing memory from 10 years ago suddenly demands to be examined. Your body is heavy, but your thoughts are wide awake, buzzing like Athenians gossiping in the marketplace. This is where Socrates, the barefoot philosopher, could have been your greatest ally. Because if there was one thing he knew how to do, it was take a restless mind and turn it into something calmer, steadier, even amused at its own chaos. If Socrates were alive today, perched at the edge of your bed like a bearded owl, he wouldn't tell you to simply stop thinking. That would be pointless advice, like telling the waves to stop being waves. Instead, he would lean closer and whisper, "Tell me, what is worry?" You might mumble something about your job, your family, your future. He would nod and ask again, "But is worry a thing in itself, or is it only your thoughts about things that have not yet happened?" Already, your mind, once spinning wildly, has been slowed by the rhythm of questioning. Worry, suddenly, doesn't feel like a mountain but a cloud. And clouds, as Socrates would remind you, drift. He would continue with little tricks of reasoning that feel less like philosophy and more like lullabies. "If you cannot control tomorrow in this moment," he might say softly, "why give it your strength tonight?" It's not a scolding, it's an invitation to let go. The thought may still linger, but now it feels lighter, easier to set aside. He might chuckle and add, "Besides, if you stay awake worrying, you'll be too tired to solve anything tomorrow." And what could be more illogical than that? Suddenly, your own insomnia is laughing at itself. Caught in a paradox, Socrates was no stranger to sleepless nights himself. He was known for standing still, lost in thought, for hours, even once for an entire night during a military campaign. While other soldiers shivered in their cloaks, Socrates remained, staring into the void of the sky, content in his musings. What could have been torment became peace, because he was not fighting his thoughts but befriending them. That is his secret. Don't battle the insomnia, converse with it. Treat your thoughts not as enemies storming the gates, but as guests at a symposium. Let them talk, smile at their absurdities, then gently see them out when they grow repetitive. He might also whisper practical tips in that strangely mischievous tone of his. "Have you noticed," he'd say, "that a body stretched too tight in its thoughts cannot rest? Loosen the body, and the soul will follow." He'd tell you to breathe deeply, as though each breath were a question asked and released. He might even advise turning your pillow as if it were a philosophical argument flipped over. Cooler, softer, ready for a new perspective. And then there would be humor, because Socrates always carried humor into even the heaviest moments. He might joke, "If you fear you'll never sleep again, think of me condemned to drink hemlock, yet still more relaxed than you are right now. Surely you can do better." He'd grin, that crooked, satyr-like grin, and suddenly your worries don't seem quite so heavy. The whisper of his advice is not a lecture, but a rhythm. Each phrase slows your racing mind. Each question pulls you gently from the tangled web of anxious thought and reminds you that you don't need all the answers tonight. You only need to rest. For even Socrates, who valued examination above all else, knew there was a time to let questions float unanswered, like lanterns released into the night. So if you find yourself tossing and turning, imagine him sitting there, old and barefoot, smiling kindly at your struggle. He leans in, voice like warm wind through olive trees. "Be still. Let ignorance have its place tonight. Tomorrow we may examine, but tonight we rest." And with that whisper, the symposium of your mind grows quieter, until only the gentle murmur of dreams remains. The night has grown deep, and the questions have softened. The city of Athens is quiet, its marketplace empty, its streets hushed. The moonlight drapes itself over the temples, and the stars are scattered like crumbs across the sky. And there, in the calm of your own room, you feel Socrates' presence one last time. Not the sharp questioner of the agora, not the bold defendant of the courtroom, but an old man, warm and kind, here to see you safely into sleep. He sits cross-legged on the floor beside your bed, cloak rumpled, eyes gleaming with mischief and wisdom. He smiles, as if he knows all the strange thoughts that have kept you awake, every worry, every embarrassing memory, every grand ambition, and loves you all the more for them. His voice is softer now, not the probing tone of debate, but the gentle murmur of a lullaby. "My friend," he says, "you have questioned enough for today. You have wrestled with truth and with yourself. Now let the soul rest, as the body rests. Tomorrow will bring its own questions, and we will meet them together. But tonight, we let them drift away." He might still slip in a little joke, because he can't help himself. "Do not worry if you dream of me asking you what justice is." He chuckles. "I promise not to grade your answers." The humor is light, playful, and strangely comforting. He is no longer the gadfly stinging the city awake, but the wise old friend making sure you can finally close your eyes. The air is cool, your blanket heavy in the best way, your pillow shaped perfectly beneath your head. You feel your breath slowing, your body loosening, as Socrates speaks on. "Think of sleep," he whispers, "as the philosopher's cloak. It covers the mind, quiets the noise, allows us to step out of the stage of the day. In dreams, perhaps we will find truth, or perhaps only laughter. Either is enough." You sense his presence growing fainter, like a lantern carried down a long hall. He does not leave abruptly, does not ghost you, for Socrates never ghosted anyone. Instead, he lingers, making sure you are safe, that the weight of the day has melted away. His final words are not a question, not a paradox, but something simple, something you realize he might have said to all his companions if he'd had the chance. "Sweet dreams, my friend." And with those words, the old man fades, leaving only the quiet rhythm of your breathing, the stillness of the room, and the deep, gentle pull of sleep. And now, as our time with Socrates comes to an end, let your eyes grow heavy and your body sink deeper into rest. Sleep well, my friend, and may your dreams be gentle and full of wonder. If, by some chance, you're still awake, don't worry, just click on one of the 2 videos on your screen and let the journey continue. And if you'd like more nights of philosophy, humor, and calm storytelling, be sure to subscribe. That way, we'll always have another conversation waiting for you. Sweet dreams, and good night.